Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
All right. Well, welcome to the show. We have Roger Kitchen of Power Mental Performance on the show tonight, Brandon. And, you know, this is one of those topics that we've probably touched on almost more than anything else on this show, other than talking about confidence and, dealing with pressure and stuff like that. But it's culture, right? I mean, you and I both come from that business side of things and have played on a lot of sports teams and have coached a lot of sports teams. And man, there's no secret to it. I mean, if you don't have that right culture, it's going to be for a long season or a long time as a company.
For sure. I mean, you get exposed pretty easy, right? Especially when you go up against either teams or organizations that have it. It's kind of like, we reference rowing the boat a couple of times, but it really is. It would be the equivalent of having a 5-man crew and only 2 of them are rowing. And, you're going up against somebody that everybody is rowing and are in sync. And, culture plays such a huge role, and it's in my opinion, because not everybody has the ability to lean into a guy like Roger. But it is becoming more and more difficult to build culture today, I think, because of what it takes. And I think with athletes or just people in general, it's difficult for them at times to hold others accountable. And so when you don't have that accountability, peer accountability, it can make it tough.
Yeah. And how important leaders are, right? I mean, we talk about that with Roger, is that leader, that coach, that manager, whatever the case may be, vice president of an organization, CEO, they're the ones that are really critical in helping establish that. And all the things you just talked about there is having the, being able to develop that culture of trust and having those shared beliefs. And it's really making sure that everybody is aligned on what the goal is. And Roger does a great job of kind of helping us unpack some of those things. And he has that background, of that employee development and learning development. And he's taught a lot of leadership and management courses and consultant work. So just a really good subject matter expert, if you will, on, what it takes to develop the right culture and, how important it is. So that we were really fortunate to have him come on the show. And then we also dig in a little bit to, how you can make that something that's a part. It has to be something that's lived every day, right? It can't just be the words on the wall, the poster board. You mentioned row the boat. I mean, I think one of the other things about culture that is so important is when we talk about really having that aligned goal is you can even have 2 people of 5 in the boat rowing, but as long as both people are rowing in synchronicity, at least you're moving forward, right? The problem is, I think a lot of times you get 2 people on one side of the boat that are rowing, and then you're just rowing in circles.
And then you're just going around and around. And you're right. And it's interesting though, we ask a couple of questions about either, significant roles and how, different pivot points and stuff like that. And I think he has some really good answers, but it was fascinating to me, especially on the significant side, on the people that played a significant role in his life or are playing a significant role. And he absolutely fits that exact same mold. And so, it goes back to some of the references too about you attract, right? Certain cultures attract certain people. And that's why they're successful. And I think Roger attracts based upon, his servant leadership. He brings people towards him. He's extremely knowledgeable, and I think the listeners are in for a treat.
Absolutely. So get your pen and paper ready. Here's Roger Kitchen. Well, Roger, welcome into the show. We are so happy to have you with us tonight, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited. I appreciate you having me on the show. And I'm a culture junkie when it comes to teams and organizations, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
We can't wait. One of the things, Roger, that the listeners, of course, heard in the introduction, that you are the founder and mental skills coach for Power Mental Performance. And I have to say, one of the things that sticks out to me when you talk about culture is, as you go through your social media, and for the listeners, of course, that's at Roger Kitchen. So at Roger _Kitchen_Junior on Instagram, and then at Power Mental Performance on Facebook. But Roger, every picture seems like when you're working with teams, you've got them working in groups. It's not one of those situations where it's individualistic training. This is, hey guys, we're going to stick together as a unit here. Was there some kind of purpose behind that? I mean, was that intentional in regard to your training?
Yeah. So my background's in employee learning and development. So by trade, I've been doing learning and development for organizations for 15 years. So a lot of platform time, a lot of facilitation, a lot of teaching, training, and movement always trumps sitting. And so when you get people up, moving around, working in groups, mixing groups up, getting people to work with maybe people they don't necessarily hang out with on the team on a regular basis. Yeah, you're trying to build a little bit of that camaraderie, get them a little bit engaged with maybe some people they don't get a chance to kind of hang out with. One of my pillars, one of the key results I always work towards when I work with a team is building positive team culture. So I'm always weaving things into my program that get athletes to work in groups, to work together, and to work in solving problems. So it is very intentional by design.
That's outstanding. And, it's interesting. One of the things about your whole platform and the whole mental performance piece of it is, I love what you say there, that, being a competitive power lifter, right? I mean, speaking of getting yourself moving, is that you were your first client, and that, mental training works because it worked for you. What impact did that have on you as a power lifter?
Oh, man. So I got introduced to powerlifting in college and fell in love with the sport, then graduate, life hits, right? Move, get married, have kids. I always stayed around the gym. I always liked to work out, but, I wasn't doing traditional powerlifting. And then I fell into the learning and development field, working for the Army as a contractor civil servant, got back into the gym, actually started doing a little bit of CrossFit as a hobbyist. And then, got back into powerlifting. And then after 24 years from my previous meet, I did one my senior year in college. 24 years later, I'm like, I'm going to get back into it. As crazy as that sounds, I'm going to get back into it. And I had moved over to NASA Marshall Space Flight Center here in Huntsville, was doing industrial organizational psychology over there. And lo and behold, my government client walks in my office one day and says, Roger, we're bringing a sports psychologist on our team to help with training high performing teams and work with leaders. I'm like, all right, that's cool. And I don't know what he's going to do, but sports psychology sounds really interesting. And as I was getting back into powerlifting, he and I sat in the same office. We became really good friends, and he just kind of started to unpack stuff for me. And I'm like, I'm nervous. I haven't done it for 24 years. And he just kind of walked me through the mental approach of getting me ready to compete again. And it just had such a huge impact on managing the stress, the nervousness, learning how to approach the meet from a different mental perspective and use that stress to my benefit, use a little bit of that anxiety to my benefit so that I could perform well. And once I got through the meet and the dust settled, I'm like, look, every athlete needs this.
Right.
And so everything that I use on me and my competitive, background, I'm like, I'm my first client. I know it works. And so if people, it's like, if it works on me and I've implemented it and I use it day in, day out in my training, and then get ready for competitions. I know it's going to help somebody else, again, with self-confidence and focus, learning how to achieve goals, performing under pressure, and, contributing to a good team culture.
This may be a difficult one because it seems like in everybody we talk to, it's such a layered, the confidence and culture thing it's very layered and complicated. But is there one thing that sticks out from your conversations with that sports psychologist early on that you're like has turned into your mantra that you could like share with the listeners, or is there one thing, like one place, if somebody had to start, that you would say, hey, why don't you look here? Or,
I think, I don't know so much about the culture piece, but the one thing that really helped with my performance was learning how to breathe.
Okay.
and the visualization piece. And that was just impactful for me to build those routines into my training and into competition. That just, it takes that edge off and just allows you to just stay neutral so that you can perform and not let your emotions hijack you. In terms of how that works culturally on a team, if you can get a team to buy in, to those concepts, learning how to visualize, learning how to breathe, being mindful, and picking up some of those concepts. And when they do it as a team, that's pretty powerful, because then everybody's moving in the same direction towards the same goal. Everybody wants to win. Look, everybody wants to perform well. They want to perform under pressure. They want to do it even when it's hard, and they want to perform at their best when it matters most. And so when you introduce a lot of these concepts, you're walking through it as a team together. And so that could be pretty powerful, because it's like we're all locked in it's kind of the gladiator mantra, right? Where we're shield to shield going into battle. So that's really how I think it could be impactful on a culture.
Before we dive into culture, there's something I want to ask you, because we have, and when you and I talked on the phone, I was sharing with you one of my favorite, lines or topics, I guess, in Urban Meyer's book Above the Line, is when he talks about the performance pathway, and that principle of leaders create culture, culture creates behaviors, and behaviors get results. And I noticed when, I know that you, for example, have your master's degree in Christian management and leadership. What was it? I mean, leadership, we know, Brandon and I both are business leaders, and this is something that you talk about on a daily basis. What was it, as you kind of look back on your life, about leadership and management that got you so curious about that? What was the
about culture?
No, just about leadership and management, and because eventually that's going to lead to culture. But do you remember what that kind of pivot point was for you that made you start to get so interested in, the importance of leadership and creating good leaders and managers?
I think it was kind of my own shortcomings.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and wanting to get better. And I always, think about the people that had impacted you through your business journey, or, wherever, on a team, in a church, whatever organization. I think there's always been people that crossed our paths that when we looked at them, we go, man, that person has the stuff.
Yeah.
And, and deep down, you may not come out and say it, but you're like, I need to be like that. And so, when I went back and got my degree in Christian management and leadership, I was working for a Christian nonprofit here in Huntsville. And I was doing it to get better. And I was doing it as a way to serve the organization. All along knowing there's just areas of my leadership that I needed to get better in. So, I think that's kind of why, I gravitated toward that, is because my saw needs to be sharpened a little bit. And there's always been people that have crossed my path that I've just been, impressed by, and I was like, man, I need to up my game a little bit, and I need to work on me in order to be able to impact other people. So it's the analogy we always say in an airplane, right? When the masks drop down, you put the mask on you first, and then you take care of other people, and that's essentially what I was doing. And then I think at the end of the day, everything rises and falls on leadership. Chuck Swindoll said that. And so leaders set the tone for the organization. There's If anything goes wrong, the leader takes, the ownership of it. If everything goes right, then they point to other people in the organization and says, it's not me, it's them.
Right.
And so, that's a powerful tone to set when you're not willing to accept any success and you're willing to accept where the organization's falling short. And it rises and falls on me or you or whomever is leading that organization.
Yeah, you brought up something a minute ago, Roger, about culture and as we start to dig into this, I think one of the things that's so clear, if you just search culture on the internet and you just search how to create culture, I don't care whether you're looking at, a book like Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, or if you're looking at, some article. I saw some articles in Forbes and an article that was in Stanford. You hit on something a minute ago that's in every single one of these things, and that's defining what your purpose is. I know you and I both went through the Brian Cain mental performance mastery program, and he has his 10 pillars, of course. And of course, pillar number 10 is defining, that right culture, creating that right culture. And one of his first things he talks about is what's going to be your mission, right? So why is that? Why do you think from your standpoint and working with some of the teams, that's so critical to be able to define that culture early on?
Yeah,
define I think that mission, I should say.
Yeah, I love that word mission because in my time around the Army, when I was a contractor and then civil servant, the word mission's huge. Why are we doing what we're doing? And that's the compelling reason. So our mission is based off that why, and mission is what drives people. It's what unites people. Knowing what you're going after and the compelling, when it's intrinsic, it's not for money, prestige, or power. It's, for teams, what's the mission? It could be conference championship. It could be, Westminster Christian Academy, their mantra is build better men. They're trying to do that through football, man. That's a compelling mission. We're not only are we able to make you the best football player possible, but we're trying to teach you how to be a man and mature and have an impact on society and be a good husband and father and raise good families and contribute to your community. And man, we're doing it with football. And so, those are compelling missions. And I feel like when people feel that sense of calling and have that sense of mission, and look, the coach defines it. The coach comes in and says, this is the real deal. Now, he may take input from coaches. He may take input from the players. And that mission kind of gets crafted and morphed, but in the end of the day, in his head, he knows what he wants, or she. Let's think about the volleyball and the basketball and some of the other female sports, ice hockey. Those coaches know what they want, and they rally the troops around that purpose and that mission, and let's get after it. And so that's why I think mission is so compelling, and it's individualized for every coach and every team.
It's interesting, Roger. You talk about the military and teams in general, and you see how sometimes coaches, whether it's officers in the military or a coach, there always seems to be this level of having to kind of strip away things from what we've learned, intrinsically, to then build people back up to share a common goal or culture. Do you find that to be successful, or have we kind of shifted away from that to where, coaches are really trying to build off the strengths of the individuals that they have today and not really tear them down to build them back up? Or is that a loaded question?
No. I'm sitting here as you're, I know exactly where you're going. So, I think my answer is this. When you look at some of the great culture builders in any sport, think of Phil Jackson.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Think of PJ, John and I were talking about PJ Fleck.
PJ Fleck,
yeah. Row the Boat, Nick Saban, John Wooden, Pete Carroll, Pat Summitt at University of Tennessee basketball. When you think about some of the great coaches, they built the culture And then I think what happens is they find people that fit that culture, and they find people who are drawn to that culture versus trying to say, okay, here's our culture. And then like, we're going to try to, you're not fitting into the culture, trying to take somebody who may not fit and ram them into that. I think they establish the culture, and then they're looking for people who fit that culture. Mm-hmm. Now, I have read some things in the last couple of years where Nick Saban's kind of flexed a little bit in terms of some of the rigidness around the process and his culture there, but he's not going to change. There's not going to be a huge standard deviation there. When you go to play at University of Alabama, the deal. I recently just watched a great video. Coach Carville at University of Massachusetts men's hockey team. If you guys haven't seen it, it's an amazing. University of Massachusetts, when he took over the program, was last in Division I hockey. And within 3 years, they were playing for a national championship and lost. And then within 5 years, they won it. And so he talks about how he changed the culture there, turned it around. And his mantra is, we recruit character over talent. And so going into University of Massachusetts hockey, there's only going to be a certain person that's going to fit that culture. And I think, back to your original question, I think coaches are going to set the culture, and there's going to be a little bit of that stripping down in the sense where there's going to be some things that you're just going to have to unlearn and then relearn in order to fit that culture, but it shouldn't be a huge shift.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whereas you said it, and you attract what you're trying to attract. Yeah.
So it's opposite in the military, because when you go into the boot camp in a military environment, they are stripping you down to build you back up in their own image. Mm-hmm. And that's the intent and purpose. And so, from a military perspective, that's what's going on. They are purposely changing, whether you like it or not. You don't have a say in it. Like, you're going through boot camp. We're breaking you down to build you back up into our image, to make you a weapon to go protect us against, enemies, foreign and domestic. So, that's the kind of the environment, the military would be in. And back to sports, even in the line of business I'm in, I work for a global consulting firm. And I just had this conversation with our COO today. There's only a certain kind of person drawn to the consulting world.
Sure.
It's high pace. It's a high up tempo. You've got to have super emotional intelligence, interpersonal skill to deal with challenging problems and clients. And it's a different environment, and not everybody fits it. And so, we're mindful that that's the culture, and we're also trying to figure out, okay, how do we still retain talent? How do we slow down attrition? How do we keep people longer? What do we do to invest in them to make it a good experience? But, at the end of the day, certain jobs are just not for certain people. Sure. And that could be academia, could be hospital, could be banking. You kind of fit that industry in the model, and certain people just seem to really align with different industry or career fields.
That makes sense. And back to your point about the military, they don't have a choice. They don't get to choose who who's joining the military. So they do have to maybe do a little more stripping away, right? So that makes sense.
Yeah, the boot camp, I think I heard a statistic years ago, mid to late 2000s. I think it was the average American citizen, only 10 or 20% could meet the physical standards for the Army at that time.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
I can believe that.
I can't remember the exact number, but it was low. But the point is, boot camp weeds you out. Your first probably 4 years in the military. And look, I have no military experience. I'm not prior military. I was in and around that environment for about 5 to 6 years. So I'm going to go on the record and say I'm kind of in the cheap seats looking in. So anybody that watches this, please reach out to me and go, Roger, you're crazy. That's not right. But, that's the intent and purpose of a boot camp.
Yeah. Well, and with any unit, that goal is going to be so critical to establish early on too. It's that, we talked about the mission. We talked about now you attract to Brandon's point and to what you're saying there, is the right people to go after this mission. But it's also, and this is one of the things I really loved about what Kaner brought to the table is with MVP, is that mission, vision, and principles, right?
Yeah, core principles.
Once you have established the mission, the vision piece is what's it look like. And I think for every good culture, you need to establish for people is, okay, this is what we're after. This is our goal. But how are we going to know when we get there? How do we define success? And then, you talk about PJ Fleck and Saban and Wooden and all those guys were very intentional about what that was going to look like. And then they were also intentional about what are the core behaviors, core principles, those things that we're going to live and breathe on a daily basis. And I think about some of the best cultures, and you think about, like I know, not to go down a whole path about Brian Cain, but I mean, one of the things he did with Schlossnagle at TCU baseball when he was still there, is that they developed that C, right? It's that, selfless and energy and excellence were the three things that C, the acronym C stood for. I know we've talked on this show before about Gary Gilmore and like selfless and relentless, the two principles he had at Coastal Carolina baseball. And I shared with you when we were talking on the phone at Bridgewater College, the softball program I worked with for a couple of years. We developed dogs, driven, one focus, grit, selflessness. My point being that whatever your goal is, you have to then, as a leader, share with everybody else is what are the things we're going to do intentionally that's going to give us the best chance to achieve this goal.
Right. In violent agreement with you. And I think the really good teams are good on execution. I think when the coach thinks like the CEO in terms of how he or she manages their staff, they're very intentional about roles and responsibilities with each coach. So Coach LeBlanc at Westminster Christian Academy was a GA for Mike Shula, and then he was there for Nick Saban's first year. And one of the things that Nick Saban did was everybody on the staff's important, and it made that very evident even down to the GA level. So, in traditional staffing systems, your GAs are on the bottom of the food chain, doing all the grunt work, and Nick Saban just kind of leveled the staff and said, we're all equal. We're all important. That's a leadership behavior that sends a message to everybody on the staff's important, and everybody has a valuable contribution to the program. And so back to your point, knowing what you want and being able to execute and get after it kind of separates the good from the great, even from average to good. Knowing roles and responsibilities for every staff, every person on the staff in terms of what's expected, what our message is, how we do it day in, day out, what those behaviors look like. The really great ones are delegating, assigning roles and responsibilities, making it super clear, and then holding people accountable daily and weekly to make sure it happens. Because look, we all know, and we hear the stories. Culture can be posters and sayings on a wall, and then nobody follows it, right?
Yep.
But like I said, the good to great, average to good are always the ones that are relentless on the execution, the roles and responsibilities, having a CEO mindset of getting it done, and then holding people accountable. It's not words.
It's so true. That accountability piece, and Brandon and I talk about this all the time on the show, is so critical because it's setting the standard. It's what does good look like? What is it that we're all agreeing that are those core behaviors we're going to have to do on a consistent basis to get us there? But then it's holding each other accountable, and it's saying, I trust you enough that you can go do your job, but I'm also going to hold that point of excellence you talked about earlier, the standard, and be able to come back and trusting each other to be able to say, hey, I don't know if you're doing the things that we're all agreed we would be doing that's going to get us to that level of accomplishment that we're all seeking. You and I talked on the phone about the fact that, one of the things, also in Urban Meyer's book was that whole, what are we willing to tolerate? What if you're willing to tolerate somebody being, at at a low standard, then you're going to get poor results. And when you know that you've arrived as a culture, I think it's when everybody is comfortable holding each other accountable and nobody's getting upset or, blaming each other for those things.
Yeah. So in business, one of Netflix core values, this was years ago, I don't know if it's true today, but they had a saying is one of their core values is we don't tolerate brilliant jerks. And so in business, how many times do we see technically savvy people who are just train wrecks, but they're kept around because of, the size of their brain and how technically smart they are. And when you tolerate that, you end up leading a toxic environment and you bring on a whole bunch of other challenges. So my mind was kind of going to different things as you talked about that. But, one of the drills I do with our teams, and I got this from Brian Kane, was we'll do those above the line, below the line. I'll do a workshop on that with a team. And we talk, the concept's easy to pick up. Hey, as a player, as a person, and if you're still in school as a student, what are those above the line behaviors that help benefit the team? And then what are those behaviors that are below the line that hurt the team? And they get it. It's super easy. And you break them up into groups and they get it. And then you say, the cool thing is you find themes. So if I've got 4 or 5 groups of like 5 to 6 athletes, you start to see the themes emerge. Don't be late. Don't talk back to coaches. Be coachable. Get good grades. And they'll come up with all these themes. Don't complain. 100% effort at all times. Quit goofing around. The hardest part for any team is the peer-to-peer, athlete-to-athlete accountability. And to your point, when you've really matured as a culture, the coaches really aren't the enforcers anymore. The staff are not the enforcers. It's the people around you that are holding everybody accountable. But it is the hardest piece in business when teams are evaluated on how well they hold others accountable. It's usually there's a dimension of like 5 criteria. It's like trust, communication, how well they resolve conflict, personal peer-to-peer accountability, and then getting results. Of those 5 dimensions, the accountability to accountability piece always scores the lowest. But it builds. You've got to have trust. To your point, you have to have trust. You have to be willing to communicate. You have to be able to resolve conflict. You have to have mechanisms in place by which, how do we do it? Resolving conflict is uncomfortable. Having difficult conversations is uncomfortable. But when some of those foundational things are worked out, it makes holding people accountable easier. But it takes a lot of heavy lifting to get to that point. I mean, coaches and managers and leaders have to be very intentional about making an environment that's psychologically safe, as we say in business, but in a team environment, making the environment, trust. What are we doing that builds trust on this team? How do we communicate? How do we resolve problems? And then when you sort of fit those things in the model, then that accountability piece kind of works itself out. It's not perfect, right, but it makes it a little bit easier.
So that's kind of where my next question was going, Roger, is as a coach, I see how difficult it is to get kids today to hold each other accountable, right? They don't want to be that guy or that girl that calls someone out for not adhering to what we agreed upon. So is it beholden to the coach? Like you said, there is a lot of heavy lifting at the beginning, and there's a lot of I don't know the best way to put it, but does it really just boil down to trust when you're talking about high school students and kids, that they feel like, okay, I can do this because, one, the coach has my back and we've all agreed upon it, and I'm not going to be perceived. I feel like perception amongst those age groups is so difficult to navigate for them. And it just seems to be getting more and more difficult. Is there any insight as to why that may be the case, do you think?
Well, and I'm going to think off the top of my head. When you look at a high school team, you've got 9th through 12th grade that could be on a team, male or female. think about the age difference between a ninth grader and a 12th grader. Think about the maturity level between a ninth grader and a 12th grader. It's a significantly huge leap. So I think in high school, it's much harder because you don't want to be that guy or that girl that, maybe saying something to somebody like, look, you need to be on time and quit goofing off. Because at that age, peer pressure and wanting to look cool and be the man or the girl, BMOC or BWOC, plays in. There's a reason only 7% leave high school and go on and play college sports, right? That's what the latest number is. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but some of it's talent. Not everybody goes on and plays. Some people don't even want to. They had a great high school career and they're done. They may have not found the right, but the point is I've seen a difference in terms of teaching mental performance and building culture a lot easier at the college level than high school, just because of maturity and just because of the step now from high school to college.
Yeah, I hope the parents that are listening and coaches that are listening really heard what you just said. I thought was a really key observation there as far as the age gap between that ninth and 12th grader. Because
it's huge.
One of the things I think happens, and we're all guilty of it, right? Is like as a parent, you're like, say to Johnny, who's a ninth grader, why can't you be more like Jimmy, who's that senior, and it's like, well, Jimmy was just like Johnny probably when he was a freshman too. He had some of the immaturity. He wasn't always on top of his ball game the way that, he is, of course, now as a senior. So it's just always being mindful of that, I think, is important when you're, whether you're parenting or coaching, is just understanding that there's going to be some shortcomings that just come from just natural maturity. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. The other thing is, and I mentioned the Culture Code earlier, the Daniel Coyle's book. Those are some people there. So Daniel Coyle, for the listeners, has written two books I would highly recommend. One's called The Talent Code, which is just basically this idea that you're not born with talent. It's one of those things that you develop over time through a lot of work and all that good stuff. But then also the Culture Code. And what he did with the Culture Code is he spent like 4 years embedding himself with like 8 or 9, I think, different organizations that really had separated themselves of having great culture and success. And he comes down, what I love about that is we've already touched on some of these things, but it came down to 3 key lessons from that. Successful groups feel safe. You mentioned safety earlier. Successful groups share their vulnerabilities and know their real advantages. And then the last one, of course, we've talked about, which is clear and unchanged purpose. But one of the things that I wanted to touch on, because you brought up the word trust, and it's so key, is he says in that book is, most people think you have to establish the trust up front, and that allows you to do the vulnerability piece. In his mind, it's if you establish those vulnerabilities early on, that's what creates the trust. You just flip those two things around. And I think that, as we talk about successful groups, and I think about some of the ones that I've been a part of, that was that open piece. We talk about in mental performance all the time. The key is if you can develop that routine and habit of assessing, like continuous assessment of like, how am I doing towards my goals? How am I doing towards these behavior changes? Is that kind of vulnerability to be able to say to somebody, and we touched on it a minute ago, is like, hey, I don't know if you see this. I talk about it as blind spots all the time as a leader, right? Is helping people identify blind spots. But I think that is really such a key thing. If we're going to be talking about culture and dig a little bit deeper in that, is that whole vulnerability, being open, so we can all help to create culture by just being more open individually to, people. It's honest assessment of us, giving us feedback, because that's going to be so critical as we move forward as well.
Yeah, I think if you spend time around a team long enough, just if you sit back and just listen to how teammates talk.
Yeah.
Just sit and listen. Don't talk much yourself, maybe ask questions, but just listen to, how they talk when they're in the weight room and on the field and in team meetings. You'll find it's really, really easy to find out when there's openness and people are allowed to be vulnerable, worse they don't. So in the business world, actually, when you're talking about the culture code, there's a book that validates that 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And he talks a lot about the vulnerability has to come first in order to get the trust. And so, and he'll talk about, there's a lack of trust if you go into a meeting and nobody's talking. So like, if the leader comes in, here's our agenda, and you start going around and like, John, give us an update. I don't got any updates, and then you go to the next person, what's going on in your world? And then they'll go with something like super safe that can't be challenged.
Yes.
But I've been on teams like that where you have like one person that likes to snipe everything that you do, undermines kind of the leader at the time. And, you get dinged once or twice and you're like, okay, I know what to say and not to say. And so those meetings, Patrick Lencioni says, look, if there's not healthy debate in those meetings, if there's not constructive conflict, if there's not vulnerability, there's no trust. And so when you think about it, if the trust is there, I'm willing to have healthy conflict, and then I can commit. Like, look, you go into a room, you hash it out, you come up with a plan, and you may not agree with the plan, but if you're willing to commit to it, at least you got to weigh in on it, right? You got to have your say. You may not have won, you may not have agreed, at least you felt heard. And then from there, those other things that come in terms of holding others accountable and getting the results that you want, they kind of build off those things. But back to the point I was trying to make, when you hang out with a team, just listen to how they talk, listen to how the coaches talk, just be that fly on the wall, and you'll pick up pretty quick. It won't take many meetings, and you're going to go, something's different here.
It is really, honestly the truth. I mean, and we've all been there, and we've been, like you said, on both ends of it. I've been on highly functioning, really strong cultures, been a part of those. And I've been a part of some in the business world, especially some cultures and some teams that it just wasn't that way. And you hit it right out of the park with the communication piece. It's so critical. Actually, it's interesting. I was doing some research for this topic today. There was an article that in Forbes that was talking about 64% of employees feel like they don't have a strong work culture. So this is we're talking about, right? I mean, the reason that this is such a hot topic, and I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of listeners listening to this as they're driving down the road, and just saying, and nodding their head like, yeah, that's my organization. Yeah, we're the ones that are missing some of that, because, that corporate culture really does define a business, and it just makes all the difference in the world, not only in achieving success, but in retaining employees. Like, I mean, most of the time that people, and this, and because this is what you do on a daily basis, but the number one reason people leave their jobs has less to do with money or any of those things. And number one is managers. It's leaders that they have. And part of it's just because they just have not created great cultures.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There is additional research now emerging that even if you have a great manager, people will still leave because now, given the Great Resignation, they're looking for a better opportunity. And the job market is in such a place that there's more opportunity. So traditionally, it has been the manager and the leader. Think about the transfer portal.
Right.
For sure.
Think about some of the great opportunities that some of, these athletes have had on the teams that they came into college. And then they're like, yeah, I like it here, but I'm going to put my name in the hat and see what happens and where I land. And there's just some uniqueness now that it just complicates things a little bit better, makes it a little bit more challenging, I guess is the right word. Now, the glass half full on that is, with the transfer portal, it does open up more opportunity for coaches to build their teams in a different way that they hadn't, had before. So, there's a lot of things that play into why somebody will stick around in a program or why they'll stick around in, in a particular field. But John, back to your point, I think that manager, that coach is just huge. And so regardless of where you work and where you play, if you love your coach and you love that leader, you're going to stay.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they just have a huge impact on you.
They really do. And it's that foundation. I used to do an exercise, and I still do it when I don't work with teams as much as I used to, but I still do it with some of the teams that I work with. And I've done it with some business teams of what I call the Jenga principle. And if you get the game of Jenga, you remember playing that, whether you're as a kid or an adult. Now you can get the bigger blocks. I'm not going to lug those around. I still use the little blocks. But the key thing about that game that you notice is the reason that as you're taking things out, the better your foundation, the more like things that are being removed, the more it can sustain itself and it holds and it doesn't fall over, right? But the key is the foundation. So if you can maintain a good foundation, whether it's having clearly defined principles like we talked about earlier, having a clearly defined mission like we talked about, but it's all foundational. And the more foundation you have, the more that you can remove a piece here. And that might be a particular business challenge, or it might be a challenge that you're facing as a sports team, and keep stacking it on and just keep stacking on. But again, if that foundation is clear, I'm always amazed sometimes when people are pulling out a piece of wood and stacking on, like there's no way that thing's going to hold up, right? But it does, because it's all in the way that foundation's built. It's a little cheesy maybe at times, but it does send a good message to everybody that, keeping in mind that, if everybody buys into that and that foundation is there. And then I think the other thing we didn't mention earlier, Roger, about leaders is, as leaders, I think it's so important when you're talking about culture is to constantly keep it in front of the team or the organization. Yeah. It's like you said it earlier, like row the boat and some of those things. Row the boat didn't just happen, and process didn't just happen with Saban. It was constantly reinforced on almost a daily basis. You got to keep bringing things back to those principles.
Yeah. In business, there's a lot of research around why change management efforts fail. So I look at it like when a coach or a program, you get a coach that comes in and does a rebuild, right? They want to put their culture in place, and they have a way by which they execute that. I see change management coming in from the business side of the house, and traditional change management efforts. There's 3 reasons why those fail. One is there's not enough senior leader involvement in that effort. 2, there's not enough communication. And 3, the people don't feel involved. When you look at some of those rebuild efforts, lay that model on there. The senior leaders, which are the coaches and the staff, are heavily involved in that. And if they're doing it right, they're communicating the daylights out of it to the point where they're sick and tired of it. Yeah. And either through like a leadership council on a team, or a team of captains, or a more mature, like at the professional level, there's just more mature players on that team that have influence. They're a part of that process as well. And so those 3 things really help the coach make the change, get the buy-in, make it stick that they want to see happen. And so I'm trying to think of a story I heard. It was an NBA coach. I don't know if it was Steve. I think it might be Steve Kerr. May have been Phil Jackson. But somebody had commented, along the lines as they were just super collaborative with the players on the team. It wasn't like they come in and say, this is the way we're doing it and this is how we're going to do it. At that level, right, a collaborative approach is probably going to be the best, because they're like, look, I'm getting paid millions of dollars. So I can go play anywhere I want to. Like, I don't need you. I'll find somebody else to lead me to a championship. So coaches have a different leadership style, but I think it was either Steve Kerr or Phil Jackson that was super collaborative in their approach and wanted that input and information from certain people. It
was Steve Kerr, and I can't, Roger, for the life of me, think of what book I read this in, but you're exactly right, because they talked in that book about how he reached out to players over the off season and brought them in from a collaboration standpoint too. That was also part of that collaboration. I can't remember.
In fact, I just saw an interview that he did after coming out of the championship last year. And like, even on timeouts, he's like, what play do you guys want to run? How are you seeing it on the floor? It may be different than how I'm seeing it. And actually, but see, that doesn't work for every team.
Right.
Right? Like, you can't do that with the Brooklyn Nets. You just can't. You can't do that with the Lakers.
Yeah.
You can do that on the Golden State Warriors because of Steve Kerr and how he's led and how he's built the team and the culture he's put in there. And the guys that he's put around, they buy in. So on a timeout, he's like, what play do you want to run? What do you see? And he'll take it all in and he'll go, let's do it. Or he'll go, no, let's run this. And then they go, okay, cool. Because they can commit to it because they built the trust.
Well, there's
and they've managed, whatever tension or conflict over the years, and they're willing to commit and execute. So,
yeah.
And then they'll go out and perform, right? Because then they're not scared to fail because all of that is there.
It's there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It takes a long time to get there. And Steve Kerr is a unique leader. If you listen to his life story about his dad and his dad being killed over in Israel when he was in academia, and Steve was in the States playing at Arizona. I mean, he's just a special human being, just because of some of the life adversity he's had to face and how he handled it.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost want to say it was Jim Appenrose's book, The Winner's Mind or something like that. We had him on the show. I can't remember, but I'm almost positive that was the book. One thing, and I know I want to be cognizant of time because I want to get to a big question I have for you here in a minute, but I also, would be remiss, I think, and I think this is the challenge people have when they talk about culture on these podcasts, is they often just keep it to the team or organizational culture. But listeners need to know you have your own personal culture too. And what happens is when you are the product of all of these different cultures that you are involved in. And because you are, it no doubt has a direct impact and effect on who you are personally. But that personal culture really informs how you're going to act on a daily basis. It's how you identify your own core principles that you're going to have and live intentionally by. And what those behaviors are going to be that you're going to do on a consistent basis that's going to help you achieve the goals that you have set for yourself. So just like we talked about that MVP process, because I know, and I'm sure you do as well, one of the things I took from Kane in the 10 principles was I sat down personally and do an MVP process about once a quarter. It's how this podcast came to be, actually, was one of my intentions as far as I had a mission that came from a servant leadership mindset. But one of my visions, what that looked like and how it was going to manifest itself, was going to be a podcast. And so I think it's really important when you sit down on whether you do it a quarterly or every 6 months basis, is to figure out what's my personal culture going to be? What am I after? What do I want to have on the gravestone, right? What's that look like? And then what am I going to do intentionally, whether it's those above the line intentional behaviors or those unintentional behaviors I want to try to avoid?
Yeah, can't agree with you more. It's probably something I don't do enough of. I know every year I set my priorities. Like, okay, this is kind of what I think my year is going to look like. These are my priorities for the year. My wife and I'll talk about it. What's our year going to look like? What do we really want to prioritize? And I literally, because I used to overcommit to things and say yes to too much. And so literally I'll draw a circle and it's only 3 to 5 priorities. And then anything else that comes in, if it doesn't align to one of those 3 to 5 priorities, I say no. And I do that annually. Depending on where I'm at with power mental performance or my competing in powerlifting. So a little over a year ago, I came up with this model, and this would be a good conversation for the next time we get together. I came up with these 10 principles, in terms of how to achieve greatness. And it was just for me. I had goals that I wanted to accomplish in a given year for powerlifting. And so I just sat down. It was a Sharpie marker and a notebook. And I said, these are the 10 things I need to do as a powerlifter in order to be successful this year. But it was based off the purpose or the premise of most people just don't wake up to do something greater than themselves. And I said, I want to wake up this year and do something greater than myself and understand why I'm doing it. And that's kind of how it all fleshed out. And then I turned it into a model that I use with teams now. So we talk about purpose and how that impacts motivation. And if you really want to do something significant in your life, here's 10 key principles that just have to be there, or it's going to be really difficult. And so, and I have it on my squat rack in my garage. I still have the Sharpie notebook piece taped to my squat rack. And when I'm out there training, I look at it and I'm like, all right, what principle do I need today? Because I'm in the front seat of the struggle bus today, and it's just hard. And I just don't feel like being here. But what principle do I need to lean on today? And, so that was a really healthy drill that I did a little over a year ago and still impacting me today.
Well, I mean, look, you hit on something, and I could smack myself for not bringing this up earlier, but that's the whole why, right? Is it anchors you. It gives you something that you can anchor back to. Those principles is something you can anchor back to. It's a commitment you made for yourself. I love that. I mean, I'm writing that down. Like, we're definitely going to have you back on to talk about the 10 principles of how to achieve greatness.
It all comes out, and I'll just say that why is like, for some people, it's a calling. They just feel called to do something. For others, it's just a passion. But there's something that's deeply intrinsic about why they do what they do. And it just, that feeds everything else.
Absolutely. So talk to the listeners about Power Mental Performance. Let's let them know what they can expect, how they get in touch with you. We talked about the website earlier. We'll give that, of course, in the show intro as well. But what can they expect when they get in touch with you? Who all are you open to work with?
So, my service is one-on-one coaching with teams, coaches, and athletes. So it really depends on the needs. So I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with athletes. Help them with their mental performance. A lot of times coaches are referring athletes to me, all sports. I've worked with baseball, football, basketball players, working with some Olympic style weightlifters right now that want to be Olympic hopefuls. So they're in my wheelhouse. So I love that with my powerlifting background. But a lot of one-on-one coaching with individual athletes. But I love sitting in with teams, getting embedded in their culture as an extension of their staff. And, typically when a coach reaches out to me, it's just that coach and I sitting down having a conversation in terms of, what's working really well for your program, and, what would be the reason to work with a mental performance coach? Where do you feel like the gaps are? And really, set up an individualized plan for that particular team and coach so that they can achieve the goals and their mission, right, for, their program. And so that's typically what, initially when people come to talk to me, that's what I'm doing. But I fall back on 5 key results: increase self-confidence, improve focus, achieve goals, perform under pressure, and create a positive team culture. And generally speaking, when I talk to coaches, they're like, I'm struggling with like one of those or 5 or 3 in terms of our program. And then they're like, and as I'm talking to them, they have athletes in their mind, like so-and-so struggles with confidence. Another one just doesn't, they practice phenomenal, but when they get into game situation, they have a hard time performing under pressure. And so some of those things emerge too in the conversation, but that's really kind of the elevator pitch on Power Mental Performance. You've given out the contact information. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. And, that's just the easiest way to get a hold of me.
I love it. I really enjoy following you on social media. We won't get into this now, but one of the go to Roger's social media and look at the post he had about cross country and the difference between running.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And, I thought that was really spot on. Brandon and I have talked about this, the difference between people who play baseball and baseball players. And there's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is good content, and it's all, you talked about the why and what's the innate thing that draws you. And I want to end with this because I have a question for you. It's something that I'm going to start asking all of our guests, and so you're going to be the first one who gets this question.
All right, I get to blaze a trail, right?
You get to blaze a trail. You're the pioneer. But I do.
Okay.
I've been on a big kick, and I'm actually going to be starting a book here pretty soon as part of the research for that. But I've been on a big kick about significance and impact, right? And just, that goal of significance. Really, I think if we can all shoot for more significance in our life, and being significant to others, really, it's really critically important, because I think, organically you're going to do a lot of good, and you'll have the right intentions there. So my question for you, Roger, is, who have been the most significant people in your life? Maybe one or two. And then what were some of the characteristics that made them have such an impact on your life?
Oh, okay. Man, thanks for tapping me on that question. So obviously I think the easy button to answer the question is, like, obviously family, right? Because they make the sacrifice in time. So my wife and my sons and my parents have been super supportive of the mental performance coaching. Because when you say yes to teams, you say no to family. You're traveling and those things, and they've been really accepting of that. To answer the other piece of that question, the people that have the most impact on me are the ones that I reached out to and said, "Hey, can I pick your brain for 30 minutes?" And they go, "Yeah." And I mean, there's a lot of people I cold called on social media and said, "Hey, I'm a mental performance coach. I'm, 5-6 years into this. I want to just pick your brain." And they're like, "Yeah, that's cool." So I cold called Justin Sua, who's the mental performance coach for Tampa Bay Devil Rays. I talked to him on the way home from a cross country meet one day, because he was just willing to talk to me. Graham Betchart, who's an NBA mental skills coach. I reached out to him through a mutual friend. And he's like, "Yeah." So, like, none of these guys know who I am, but they're just willing to say, "Yeah, I'll talk to you." Chad McGee, who's doing great work on meditation up at Wisconsin, reached out to him and said, I just want to talk. So anybody that picks up the phone and responds to my request just to talk shop for 30 minutes and learn more, that's who's had the most impact in my life. Because one, it shows humility, that they're not too big to talk to somebody they don't know. 3, they're willing to give, or 2, they're willing to give back, and share what's in their head and not hoard it just for themselves. And 3, it's just, kind of selfless service. They're just willing to help somebody else. So, I can rattle off a bunch of other names, of people that I just cold called and said, "Hey man, would you mind talking to me?" And they go, "Yeah, sure. No problem." And so those are the kind of people that have had the biggest impact on me. And then I've met a lot of great leaders through NASA in my time there, and even with the Army, that I just thought they were inspirational and motivational. And look, I'm not a motivational speaker. I am not wired like that. Right. I'm not like E.T. the hip hop preacher, Eric Thomas, if you follow him, right?
I do. I love E.T.
I love that guy. I'm like, I wish I had like the energy he falls asleep with. I'm wired more like a teacher. So I say I'm a motivational teacher. I'm just not a motivational speaker.
Right.
I'm better at teaching and training than motivational speaking. So when I see people wired like that, that's inspirational to me too. Because I'm in the closet, like I wish I was like them, but I'm like, "Roger, you got to stay in your wheelhouse and know your swim lane.
Know thyself." That's right.
Yeah, because if I get out there and try to do that, it just comes off wrong and it just doesn't land right. But when I stay true to myself in terms of being a motivational teacher, a motivational trainer, then it just works a lot better for me.
Well, first of all, you really hit it out of the park there with your answer. So that'll be a good way to kind of be a trailblazer for everybody else who gets that question in the future. I will say Brandon and I would definitely concur in this mental performance arena, that everybody has been. I mean, we say all the time, we've had way more better guests than we ever hoped to have on this, on this show, or deserve, because of the fact that, they're also willing to just share and to talk, and they want to. It's just the way they're wired. They want to help. Whether it's just another coach, whether it's an athlete, a client, whatever the case may be. And you're amongst those people, and we really appreciate you taking the time tonight to.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. With us. but we have great respect for you and what you're doing and working with all of the people that you're working with, both leaders and coaches, as well as the athletes themselves. So keep doing what you're doing, man. We're going to definitely have you back here sometime in the future, and we'll break down some more of this stuff and hopefully help people become a little bit better as a result of it.
Man, I love it. You didn't scare me off. I'm willing to come back.
Good.
So, yeah, I loved it. I appreciate the time. Like I said, I can talk to a blank wall. So you guys are one step above that. So, yeah,
there you go.
All good.
We'll take it.
Well,
right, Roger.
we appreciate it, Roger.
Have a great night, man. We appreciate you.
You're great. Thank you.
Stay in touch. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.